Why do superpowers exist? And what happens when they don't? In the spring of 2025, something quietly extraordinary happened. A US president told European allies to pay for their own defense or find it themselves. A country that had guaranteed the security of 32 nations for 80 years looked at the bill and said, "Not our problem anymore." And for the first time since 1945, the world's most powerful nation deliberately stepped back from the role that had defined the entire global order. Which raises a question that almost nobody is asking clearly. Why did America take on that role in the first place? Not out of generosity, not out of ideology, but because superpowers don't exist by accident. They exist because the world needs them to exist. Because without a single dominant power setting the rules, enforcing the order, and guaranteeing the system, history tells us exactly what happens, and it is not good. This is the story of why superpowers are created. What function do they actually serve? And what the historical record says happens to the world, to trade, to security, to ordinary people, every single time the superpower disappears. The word superpower was coined in 1944, but the concept is ancient. A superpower is not simply the strongest country in the world. There have always been strong countries. What makes a superpower different is this. It is a country so dominant, militarily, economically, and institutionally, that it can set the rules that everyone else has to follow, not through constant force, through credibility. Rome didn't station a legion in every province every day. It didn't have to. The mere knowledge that Rome could and would enforce its will was enough to keep most of the empire in line most of the time. Roman law, Roman currency, Roman roads, these weren't just infrastructure. They were a system, a set of rules that made trade, travel, and governance predictable across millions of square miles. That predictability is the product that superpowers actually sell. The British Empire ran the global economy through the 19th century, not primarily through military occupation, though it used that too, but through the pound sterling, the Royal Navy's guarantee of open sea lanes, and a set of commercial and legal norms that made doing business across borders reliable in a way it had never been before. And after 1945, the United States built something even more explicit. The dollar as a reserve currency, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN Security Council, NATO. A web of institutions, alliances, and financial frameworks that created a rules-based international order, built by America, run by America, and serving America's interests first. But also, and this is the part that gets forgotten, serving everyone else's interests too. Because the alternative to a superpower-run order is not a peaceful world of equals. It's something much older. To understand what a world without a dominant power actually looks like, you don't have to imagine it. History has run the experiment repeatedly. The period between 1618 and 1648, known as the 30 Years' War, was what Europe looked like when no single power could impose order. 8 major powers, dozens of smaller states, religious factions, dynastic rivalries, and no one is strong enough to stop any of them. The result: 1/3 of the German population dead, Central Europe devastated for a generation, commerce collapsed, cities emptied. The most destructive conflict in European history until the World Wars, precisely because there was no superpower to deter it, contain it, or end it. Then, the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 created a new framework. Not a superpower, but rules, enough stability to rebuild. Jump forward to 1870, the Ottoman Empire, once a dominant power controlling the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeastern Europe, is in terminal decline. What happens in the vacuum? Every European power rushes in. Russia pushes south. Britain consolidates Egypt. France takes Algeria. Austro-Hungary expands into the Balkans. The scramble for Ottoman territory directly ignites the conditions that produce World War I. The empire didn't have to collapse violently for the world to become more violent. The vacuum it left was enough. And then, the most instructive example of all, the interwar period, 1919 to 1939. After World War I, Britain was too exhausted to maintain global order. America retreated into isolationism and refused to take Britain's place. The result was 20 years of no dominant power, no enforcer, no guarantor. And into that vacuum stepped every revanchist, nationalist, and authoritarian movement that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Germany, Italy, Japan. The absence of a superpower didn't produce peace. It produced the Second World War. That is history's answer to the question of what happens when the superpower leaves. Not stability, not a peaceful world of equals cooperating freely. Chaos, rivalry, and eventually, catastrophic violence. Which brings us to right now. In 2026, the United States is not gone. Let's be precise about that. It still has the world's largest military. The dollar is still the world's reserve currency. American institutions still set the baseline rules for global trade and finance. But something has shifted, and it is structural, not rhetorical. America is no longer unambiguously committed to the role of global guarantor. The current administration has made clear, repeatedly and explicitly, that the alliances, the trade frameworks, and the security guarantees that defined American superpower behavior for 80 years are now conditional, up for renegotiation based on what Washington gets in return. That is a different kind of superpower, and the world is responding accordingly. Europe is doing something it hasn't done in 80 years, seriously rearming. Germany, constitutionally restrained from military spending since 1945, broke its own rules in 2024 and committed to a €100 billion defense fund. France is pushing for European strategic autonomy. The phrase, "we cannot rely on America," is being said openly, in public, by heads of state. China is not filling the vacuum yet, but it is positioning. The Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese infrastructure investment in 140 countries, is not philanthropy. It is the construction of an alternative dependency network, one where the rules are set in Beijing, not Washington. And the global South, the nations that were never fully inside the American-led order, is watching all of this with something that looks a great deal like opportunity. BRICS has expanded. Currencies are being settled bilaterally outside the dollar system. The language of multipolarity, a world of several roughly equal powers rather than one dominant one, is everywhere. But here's the historical problem with multipolarity. It has never produced stability. The closest the modern world came to a genuinely multipolar order was the Concert of Europe, the system established after Napoleon's defeat in 1815, in which Britain, Russia, Austria, Prussia, and France agreed to manage European affairs collectively. It worked for about 40 years. And then the interests diverged. The Crimean War broke the consensus in 1853. The Franco-Prussian War in 1870 shattered it completely. By 1914, the multipolar order had produced not stability, but a web of competing alliances so rigid, so mutually reinforcing, that a single assassination in Sarajevo was enough to trigger a continental war. This is what political scientists call the stability-conflict paradox of multipolar systems. When power is distributed among several roughly equal players, there is no single force strong enough to deter aggression, only a balance so precarious that any disruption cascades. The League of Nations after World War I was designed to solve this, to create a collective superpower through international institutions. It failed completely. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, the League condemned it. Japan left the League, and that was that. Collective security only works when someone is powerful enough and willing enough to enforce it. Without that, it's a committee, and committees don't deter armies. The optimistic version of our current moment says, the world is becoming multipolar, and that means more voices, more balance, more shared responsibility for global order. The historical version says, multipolarity has preceded every major systemic war in the modern era. Both things can be true at the same time. That's what makes this moment so genuinely dangerous and so genuinely important to understand. So what actually happens next? 3 scenarios are playing out simultaneously, and none of them has a clean ending. Scenario 1. American recommitment. The US, under current or future leadership, returns to full engagement, rebuilds alliances, re-anchors the dollar system, reasserts its role as guarantor of last resort. The order holds, history pauses. Scenario 2, Chinese succession. China successfully builds an alternative order, one centered on yuan-denominated trade, Belt and Road dependency, and Shanghai-based institutions. The world splits into two systems, two spheres, two sets of rules. A Cold War 2.0, slower and more economic than its predecessor. Scenario 3, nobody wins. The transition period extends for decades. No power is strong enough to impose order. No power is weak enough to accept someone else's. The world fractures into regional blocks, European, American, Chinese, Indian, each managing its own neighborhood, none capable of managing the whole. Historians call Scenario 3 an interregnum, a between time. The last interregnum lasted from 1919 to 1945. 26 years, 2 world wars, 50 to 80 million dead. Now, this is not a prediction. It is a warning pattern, the same one that has appeared before every major systemic breakdown in the modern era. And understanding it, knowing why superpowers exist, knowing what history says happens when they don't, is not a cause for despair. It is a cause for clarity. Because the choices being made right now by governments, by alliances, by ordinary voters in elections across the democratic world are the choices that will determine which scenario plays out. And you cannot make a clear choice about something you don't understand. Superpowers exist because the world needs someone to hold the system together. Not because powerful nations are generous, not because dominance is just, but because the alternative, a world of competing equals with no enforcer of last resort, has a historical track record that is devastating. We are living inside a superpower transition, the most consequential geopolitical shift since 1945, and most people are watching it through the lens of daily headlines, missing the pattern underneath. We are living inside a superpower transition, the most consequential geopolitical shift since 1945, and most people are watching it through the lens of daily headlines, missing the pattern underneath. Every headline has a past. Every crisis has a structure behind it. If this analysis helped you see that structure, subscribe to Epoch Insight and hit the notification bell. We cover the hidden forces shaping the world you live in, and let us know in the comments, which scenario do you think plays out? American recommitment, Chinese succession, or the interregnum? We read every single one.